Hi guys, welcome to iTTV. I am Mr. Wong, your English teacher. In today's lesson, we're going to learn about a sentence writing style that is very important. We're going to talk about simple present tense. Now, simple present tense is something that we use all the time. For example, when you want to talk about how you feel, that would be using simple present tense. Now, let's get down to it. Let's look at how and when we use simple present tense. Are you ready? Let's go. Now, let's take a look at this slide. Simple present tense. Number 1. Used to describe a general truth, a state that is permanent. Now let's look at this example. The internet provides a lot of information for students' projects. So this is the first example of where we can use simple present tense, when we are describing a general truth. Now, what is a general truth? A general truth is something that is accepted everywhere. For example, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Now this is the same anywhere you go. So this is a general truth. Now if I am going to say that chocolate milk is the nicest drink in the world, now this is not a general truth because somebody might prefer strawberry milk or plain milk. But when it's a general truth, it is something that is accepted everywhere, and that is when we use simple present tense. Now, we also use it to state something that is permanent, so something that does not change. For example, again, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. This is something that is permanent. It will never change. So, going back to the example that was given, the internet provides. So, the simple present tense here is provides a lot of information for students' projects. Now this is true. Many years ago, before the internet, when you wanted to look for information, you would say that the library provides a lot of information. But today, most students go to the internet first. It has become their number one source of information, and therefore it is a general truth. Now, let's look at another example of where we will use simple present tense. Let's go to the slide. Number 2. Used when giving commands, directions, explanations, and instructions. Let's look at the example. Sign in before you open your email. So, another example of where you can use simple present tense is when you give commands or directions, or when you are explaining something. Also, when you go through a list of instructions or give an instruction, you will also use simple present tense. So, the example used sign in, okay, not signed in, but sign in. It's a present tense when given the instruction to how to access an email account. So, sign in before you open your email. So, this is an instruction. So, when you give an instruction, when you give a command, explanation, or direction, you will also use simple present tense. So, let's look at the next example of when we use simple present tense. Number 3. Used with verbs that relate to mental or emotional states, possession, or to the senses. Non-action verbs. Now let's look at an example. The new Nokia mobile weighs only 10 grams. So, another reason to use simple present tense is when we use verbs that relate to mental or emotional states, or possession or to the senses. So here we're going to look at senses. We're going to talk about weight, how something feels in your hand. The new Nokia mobile, so the new Nokia phone, weighs only 10 grams. So that means that it weighs very, very little, only 10 grams. So here, weighs is a simple present tense. Okay, now let's look at the last example of where we use simple present tense. Used to describe a habitual action started in the past, existing now, and will continue in the future. For example, most students use the computer to retrieve information for their assignments. Now, what is habitual action? A habitual action is an action that you do every day or you continuously do. So for example, eating. You eat every day. So when you use simple present tense, when you use the word eat, I eat every day, the word eat is a simple present tense. Now, let's look at the example. Most students use the computer to retrieve information for their assignments. So here, because it is something that is existing now and will continue to exist, we use the simple present tense use. So remember these 4 different examples of when we use simple present tense. So the 4 examples of where we use simple present tense. Number 1, when we describe a general truth or a state that is permanent. Number 2, used when we give commands, directions, explanations, and instructions. Number 3, when we use verbs that relate to mental or emotional states, possession, or to the senses. Now remember, non-action verbs. And of course, number 4, when we describe a habitual action, started in the past, existing now, and will continue in the future. So, if you can remember these 4 examples of when to use simple present tense, you will be able to use simple present tense correctly all the time. Now that we have gone through that, we're going to look at an exercise. Let's read the instructions together. Fill in the blanks with the simple present tense form of the verbs in the brackets. Now, whenever you begin, always read the instructions carefully. So what do we have to do? We need to fill in the blanks with the simple present tense form of the verbs in the brackets. So look at the verbs in the brackets and we'll need to choose the correct simple present tense form. Are you ready? Let's do this together. Many children today, blank, in brackets B, very familiar with the World Wide Web, and blank, in brackets, use it so widely that the geographical and physical distance of places has been vastly reduced. So, we have 2 verbs in the brackets here. The first one is be, the second one is use. So, go through it again and choose the correct simple present tense. Are you ready? Let's look at the answers. Many children today are very familiar with the World Wide Web and use it so widely that the geographical and physical distance of places has been vastly reduced. So, the first bracket B is replaced with are. So, many children today are very familiar with the World Wide Web. Now, the World Wide Web is simply the internet. And use, you see, no changes, it's still correct, and use it so widely that the geographical and physical distance of places has been vastly reduced. Let's move on. So, we have 2 blanks here. The first one in brackets was B, and we have changed that to R. And the second bracket, use, stays the same, there is no change there. So, when we use simple present tense, okay, many children today are. So we use the simple present tense are, okay, very familiar with the World Wide Web. And use, so no change there, it's so widely that the geographical and physical distance of places has been vastly reduced. That is why we go back to our theme for this whole lesson. It's a small world after all. Technology has indeed made a lot smaller. So let's move on to the next slide. These children are connected to a huge digital universe that blank, in brackets go, beyond any form of distance that divides and blank, in brackets separate, one child from another. You may fill in your answers now. Are you done? Now let's take a look at the answers. These children are connected to a huge digital universe that goes beyond any form of distance that divides and separates one child from another. So, for the verb go, we have added es and it's now changed to goes. And separate, we just need to add an s and we have separates. So we have two simple present tense that have replaced both the verbs in the brackets. Okay, let's move on. A child living in Malaysia is able to stay connected with a child residing thousands of kilometers away 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if both the children blank, in brackets, choose to do so. You may fill in your answer now. Now let's take a look at what the answer is. A child living in Malaysia is able to stay connected with a child residing thousands of kilometers away, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if both the children choose to do so. So again, no change here. We just take the word choose and we just write it down. So it's actually very easy. So choose is a simple present tense. Let's move on. So, the internet in general and the World Wide Web in particular has shrunk the vast world to become a mere global village. Now this phrase global village is exactly what the internet has done to the world. Now, a long time ago, the world seemed very, very big. But today, what we really are is a global village. We are just a small village, right, that encompasses the whole world thanks to the invention of the internet. Now, let's move on. Today, children worldwide who blank, in brackets, explore the internet are able to produce their own art and blank, in brackets, display it to other children around the world. So we have two blanks here. Fill in your answers now. Are you done? Now let's take a look at the answers. Today, children worldwide who explore the internet are able to produce their own art and display it to other children around the world. So, the answers for these two are exactly the same as the verb in the brackets. So if you wrote it just like that, you got it exactly right. Now let's move on. They are also able to write and blank, in brackets, share their own stories in an online magazine. Apart from that, children are able to scan for information in a more interactive way. You may fill in your answer now. So again, all you have to do to answer this is to write the same word again. So it's share. So the answer should be, they are also able to write and share their own stories in an online magazine. Let's move on. The World Wide Web, blank, in brackets, enhance their learning process by providing a rich diversity of information and ideas which blank in brackets reach across national borders. So the answer here is the World Wide Web enhances their learning process by providing a rich diversity of information and ideas which reach across national borders. So for the first blank, the word enhance needs to be changed to enhances. The second one, reach, is written exactly the same. So if you got all of that right, very good. Now if you didn't, it's okay. Just practice a little bit more and remember the 4 examples that we talked about where we need to use simple present tense. Go back to that, look it up, and you'll get it right the next time. Now let's move on to the next exercise. Choose the correct answer. Now, in the next exercise, all you have to do is choose the correct answer. So, from a list of 4 different choices, you will need to choose the correct one. So, read the sentence carefully, look at all 4 answers before you make your decision. Are you ready? Let's take a look at the first question. Number 1. The moon blank round the earth. Now we have 4 choices of answers. A, moving, B, moves, C, moved, and D, move. You may write your answer now. Let's take a look at the answer for question 1. The answer is B, moves. The moon moves round the earth. So here, the correct simple present tense to choose would be moves, M-O-V-E-S. The answer is B. So for those of you who got it correct, good job. For those of you who didn't, don't worry, we have got a lot more to practice. Now, let's move on to question 2. Question 2. My parents blank 2 kilometers every morning. A, jog. B, jogs. C, jogged. D, jogging. You may write your answer now. Let's take a look at what the correct answer is. The correct answer here is jog. My parents. There is an S there, so we use jog. 2 kilometers every morning. Now, after question 1, did any of you choose B again because you saw the S? Now, sometimes we have to read the whole sentence before we choose our answer. Now, the key word here in the question is parents. The S is already there. So the answer should be my parents jog. No S. 2 kilometers every morning. Let's move on to question 3. Question 3. One city blank her children to school every day. Now, let's look at this question carefully. What is it talking about? Every day. You may write your answer now. Okay, let's take a look at the answer. And the answer is B. So one city, that's one person, drives with an S her children to school every day. So the first thing, we look at every day. So something that is habitual. So straight away we know we need to use simple present tense. Now, then we look at one city. So one city, one person, so we use drives. So drive with an S. Let's move on to question 4. Question 4. The clowns usually blank funny faces at the audience. A, making. B, make. C, makes. D, made. You may write your answer now. And the answer to the question is B, make. The clowns usually make funny faces at the audience. Are you starting to see when to use the S and when not to use the S? That's right, the clowns. So that was the important word that we needed to see. So the clowns usually make funny faces at the audience. Now, what if it was the clown? Then it might be a little bit different. The clown usually make or makes. So the clown usually makes funny faces at the audience. But because clowns here is plural, we use make. Let's go to question 5. Question 5. James blank to Kota Kinabalu by plane once a week. A, travel. B, traveling. C, travels. D, traveled. You may write down your answer now. Now let's take a look at the answer. And the answer is C, travels. James travels to Kota Kinabalu by plane once a week. Now, did any of you get confused with James' name? Now, there is a S behind James' name, but James is only one person. So, we use travels with an S. So, the correct answer is C. James travels to Kota Kinabalu by plane once a week. Now, moving on to question 6. Question 6. All fish blank through their gills. A, breathe. B, breathes. C, breed. D, breathing. You may write down your answer now. Now let's take a look at the answer. And the answer is A, breathe. All fish breathe through their gills. Now, this is a fact. So, because it's a fact, we need to use simple present tense. Now, fish. So, it's plural, so we use breathe. Now, let's move on to question 7. 7. The postman blank our letters in the morning. A, bring. B, bringing. C, brought. D, brings. You may write down your answer now. Let's take a look at the answer. The postman brings our letters in the morning. So the answer is D, brings. So I'm sure you've got it down by now. So the postman is one person, so we use bring with an S, brings. So the answer is D. The postman brings our letters in the morning. Moving on to question 8. 8. I usually blank bread and jam for breakfast. A, has. B, had. C, have. D, having. You may write your answer now. Let's take a look at the answer for question 8. I usually have bread and jam for breakfast. The answer is C, have. So here, very easy. I, one person, so we use have. So I usually have bread and jam for breakfast. Question 9. Hisham never blank his teachers. A, disobey, B, disobeying, C, disobeys, and D, disobeyed. You may write your answer now. Let's take a look at the answer for question 9. Hisham never disobeys his teacher. So the answer is C, disobeys. Now, how many people is Hisham? That's correct. It's only one person, so we need that S. So Hisham never disobeys his teachers. And finally, the last question, question 10. Hope you get it correct. So let's look at the last question. The old woman always blank on the bench under the tree. A, sitting, B, sits, C, sit, and D, seated. You may write your answer now. Are you ready? Let's take a look at the answer for the last question. The old woman always sits on the bench under the tree. The answer is B, sits. So the old woman, again, is only one person, so the answer is sits with an S. So with that, we have done 2 exercises to teach you about simple present tense. Now, I want you to remember the 4 examples of when to use simple present tense. The first one is used to describe a general truth, a state that is permanent. So when something is accepted everywhere, when something is always true, that is when we use simple present tense. Number 2, used when giving commands, directions, explanations, and instructions. So remember, whenever you're giving commands, giving directions, explanations, or even instructions, again, we need to use simple present tense. 3, used with verbs that relate to mental or emotional states, possession, or to the senses. So this is another reason to use simple present tense. But for this one, you need to remember non-action verbs. And finally, used to describe a habitual action. Now, what is a habitual action? Something that we do over and over again. Started in the past, existing now, and will continue in the future. So, remember these 4 examples of when to use simple present tense. And of course, when you read your sentence and you need to choose the correct simple present tense, always remember that if you're talking about one person, we need that S. And if it's plural, more than one person, we don't need the S. Also, remember James? Now, don't get confused with people's names that end with an S. James is only one person. So, remember the 4 different reasons to use simple present tense. And remember the few tips that I just told you, and you're gonna do fine. Now, what you need to do now is go, open some books, and start to do exercises, because the more you practice, the better you will get. So guys, that's all the time we have for today. Until I see you next time, go and practice simple present tense. Bye-bye.